The lights were too bright, the audience clapped too loud, and the air in the studio felt heavy. Keanu Reeves sat still, hands folded gently in his lap, waiting for his cue. His long dark hair fell slightly over his eyes, but he didn't push it back. He looked calm, like always. That soft, polite smile, the one the world had come to love, stayed fixed on his face. But deep inside, something churned. He had agreed to appear on The View out of respect. He was promoting a small documentary project about grief and healing, a subject close to his heart. It wasn't about selling tickets. It wasn't flashy. It was something real. Something quiet. He had spent years working on it. Filming strangers. Talking about loss, about love, about what it means to move forward when your heart is broken. He didn't come here for drama. But as the hosts introduced him, Keanu noticed something strange. Their smiles were too wide. Their words, a little too rehearsed. The audience clapped, but he could sense the tension behind it, like they were expecting a fight, not a conversation. Then Joy Behar leaned forward and spoke in that sharp tone she was known for. "So Keanu," she said with a smirk, "you're usually so quiet, so mysterious. But here you are, talking about feelings, grief, healing. Tell me, is this another Hollywood thing? Another way to stay relevant?" The air froze. Keanu blinked slowly, unsure if he'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" he said softly, not angry, not yet, just confused. Joy didn't back down. She doubled down. "I mean, look, we all know you're famous for playing silent, brooding types. John Wick doesn't cry, right? Now you're making the documentary about crying? I just find that surprising. Maybe even a little disingenuous." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Some gasped. The other hosts shifted awkwardly in their seats. Keanu paused. He could have smiled and moved on, played the game. But something about her tone, her smirk, the way she mocked something so personal, it stirred something deeper. He cleared his throat, eyes steady. "This project," he said, voice even and low, "isn't about staying relevant. It's about being human. We all lose people. We all carry pain. I made this to honor that pain, not to sell anything." Joy crossed her arms, undeterred. "Sure," she said. "But don't you think actors using grief as a brand is a little much? Everyone has pain. We just deal with it quietly, not on film." Keanu's jaw tightened. His fingers curled slightly on his lap. And for the first time, his smile faded. He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "I buried my best friend when I was 23, he said. "I buried my daughter before she was born. I lost the woman I loved in a car crash. This isn't a brand, it's my life." The silence was deafening. Even Joy looked caught off guard for a moment. He stood up. No dramatic music, no shouting. Just quiet strength. "I think we're done here," he said. Joy laughed nervously, trying to recover. "Oh, come on, lighten up." But Keanu had already taken off his mic. The cameras kept rolling. The producers panicked behind the scenes. But the world had just witnessed something rare. A man refusing to trade his pain for applause. He walked off the set slowly, respectfully, as if walking away from noise that never deserved his truth. And the internet exploded. Across the world, people replayed that moment. The man known for kindness had stood up for something deeper, not with anger, not with pride, but with dignity. And somewhere in that studio hallway, far from the cameras, Keanu Reeves took a deep breath. He felt free. Outside the studio, the city roared with its usual noise, honking cars, fast footsteps, and voices layered in every direction. But for Keanu, it all faded into a low hum. He walked alone through the back alley exit, past the security gate, where no cameras followed, where no fans waited. His hands were deep in the pockets of his black jacket, and his breath came out slow and tired, like each exhale carried more than just air. He wasn't angry, not really. He had seen worse, lived through worse. But still, something inside him ached. The way Joy Behar had laughed, the way she treated his grief like a performance, it wasn't just rude. It was hollow. It reminded him how the world sometimes forgets that even those who smile quietly might be carrying the heaviest stories. He walked 2 blocks in silence and turned into a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The owner, an old man with soft eyes and a crooked smile, looked up from behind the counter. "You look like you need warmth," the man said gently. Keanu gave a small nod and sat by the window. No one in the cafe seemed to recognize him, or maybe they did, but chose to respect his silence. Either way, it was peaceful. He ordered tea and watched the rain start to fall against the glass, turning the street outside into soft ripples of light. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket, over and over. Missed calls, texts, studio managers, publicists, even strangers. He ignored them all. But one message stood out. It was from Sandra. Sandra Bullock. They had remained close, even years after their films. Their bond was something special, built on understanding, shared values, and quiet respect. Her text was short. "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you." A small smile returned to his face. He typed back, "Didn't feel brave, just felt necessary." A moment later, she replied, "That's what makes it brave." As he sipped his tea, his thoughts drifted back to the early days, when he was just a kid riding buses in Toronto, flipping through books in used shops, dreaming quietly. No one expected much from him back then. He wasn't the loudest, not the strongest. But there was something inside him, even then, a kind of fire that didn't burn with rage, but with purpose. That fire had kept him going through loss after loss. When his best friend River passed away, Keanu had disappeared from Hollywood for months. People speculated. Headlines spun stories. But what they never saw was the young man sitting by the ocean, talking to the wind, asking why good people always left first. They didn't see the nights he spent reading letters River had written, over and over. They didn't see the hospital halls when he lost his daughter, or the silence in his apartment after the car crash that took Jennifer's life. They didn't hear the songs he played on the piano alone. To no one, they only saw the smile, the calm. The kindness. But that kindness was not weakness. It was forged from loss, from struggle, from choosing again and again to be gentle in a world that wasn't single quotes d. Now, after walking out of that studio, Keanu felt something shifting. Not just in the public eye, that would come later, but inside himself. For years, he had been carrying his pain quietly, almost like a duty, letting people project whatever they wanted onto him. The sad hero, the humble actor, the meme, the mystery. But now, he had spoken his truth, and the world had heard it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook, worn at the edges, pages filled with quiet thoughts and scribbled poems. He flipped to the last entry, stared at it for a moment, then started writing. Kindness is not the absence of pain. It is the choice to carry it without making others bleed. As he wrote, the cafe filled with soft music, the kind that doesn't demand attention but wraps around your heart anyway. And for a brief moment, everything felt still. Behind him, 2 young women at a nearby table whispered to each other. One finally leaned closer and said gently, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you?" Keanu turned, met her eyes, and gave a warm smile. "Yeah," he said, "but I'm also just a guy having tea." She smiled back and didn't ask for a picture. Instead, she said something different. "Thank you for standing up for what matters." He nodded. In a world chasing noise, sometimes silence speaks loudest. By the time Keanu finished his tea and stepped back into the rain, the world outside had already changed. He didn't know it yet, but inside homes, coffee shops, and buses across the globe, millions of eyes were fixed on their screens, watching him walk out of that studio in silence. Replaying the moment over and over, the clip had gone viral. But more than that, it had touched something. The moment wasn't dramatic. There were no slamming doors or shouting matches. No viral insults or camera tricks. Just a man calmly walking away from mockery, from noise, from a room that tried to treat grief like gossip. And somehow, that simple action echoed louder than any scripted speech could. Hashtags began to trend. Hashtag respect Keanu, hashtag grief is not as how, hashtag kindness is strength. People posted their own stories about the losses they never spoke of, about moments they stayed quiet in a loud room. Nurses wrote about holding patients' hands during their final breaths. Teenagers talked about losing siblings and pretending to be okay in school. Old veterans shared stories of friends who never came home. The internet, for once, wasn't just loud. It was human. Keanu sat on a bench near a small park, his hood pulled up to shield him from the drizzle, as his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't media people or agents. It was his sister, Kim. Kim had battled leukemia for years. And through all the pain and treatments, Keanu had been her quiet guardian, never asking for praise, never telling the world. Now her message read, "You reminded people that feelings matter. You reminded me." He stared at the message for a long time, heart full and heavy. He remembered the hospital rooms, the quiet nights, the way Kim had once told him with a weak smile, "You make my pain feel less lonely." Back then, he didn't have words. He just stayed by her side. And now, people who had never met him were saying the same thing, that somehow, by simply walking out, he had told the world that it was okay to feel, to care, to not perform their pain. A few feet away, a young boy and his father were playing catch, laughing between the raindrops. Keanu watched them quietly. A moment like that, so small, so easy to miss, was everything he wished he could relive with his own father. The man who left too early, and who Keanu spent years trying to understand through characters, through roles, through silence. His thoughts were broken by the gentle approach of a woman, maybe in her late 40s. She walked slowly, a cautious respect in her posture. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I don't mean to intrude. I just wanted to say, my husband passed last year. I haven't been able to talk about it, not really. But today, watching you, I cried for the first time in months, so, thank you." Keanu stood up slowly, not to run away from her words, but to meet her heart on the same level. He didn't say much. He just offered her a kind, warm hug. No cameras, no applause. Just two strangers holding pain with dignity. That night, news channels tried to spin the event in different ways. Some said Keanu was overreacting. Others called behar out for being insensitive. Debates flared across networks. But beyond all the noise, something more meaningful was unfolding. A young filmmaker in Italy wrote a blog post titled, "The Silent Lesson of Keanu Reeves." It read, "He didn't shout. He didn't cancel. He didn't insult. He simply stood up, told his truth, and walked away. And in doing so, he reminded us what real courage looks like." It went viral. The studio tried to do damage control. Joy released a statement, half apology, half defense. It didn't land well. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed quiet, not out of strategy, just because he didn't need to add more. The moment had spoken. A few days later, a letter arrived at his home, handwritten, no return address. "Dear Keanu, you don't know me. But after I lost my son to cancer, I felt invisible. Like my grief made people uncomfortable. I started to think maybe I was too much. But when you said what you said on live TV, I felt seen. You saved a piece of me. Thank you." He read it 3 times before folding it gently and placing it in a small wooden box, the one where he kept things that mattered most. River's letters, photos of Jennifer, Kim's first sketch. And now, this letter too. In a world full of Noise, a man had said one quiet truth, and the world had heard. The days passed slowly, like the way light moves across a hospital room when all you can do is wait. And during those quiet days, something unexpected began to grow, not in the tabloids or the trending hashtags, but in people. In the parts of them that often go untouched. The small soft places where pain sits without speaking. Those corners began to feel a little lighter, as if someone had finally walked in and acknowledged they existed. Keanu stayed out of sight. He didn't do interviews, didn't respond to media requests. He spent his mornings walking early, before the sun fully rose, through the streets of Los Angeles still painted with shadows. He liked it better that way. When people were just waking, when the world felt honest. He visited small bookstores, cafes where no one looked twice. He sat on park benches and fed birds with pieces of old bread. Not because it was poetic, but because it felt simple, true. But behind the scenes, something was happening, something he never asked for, never imagined. Schools began using his walk-off moment in their media classes. Therapists started referencing it in grief support groups. Strangers began leaving flowers outside the View's studio gate, not in anger, but as symbols of softness, of support, of shared sorrow. And one day, a woman named Lena called him. She worked with a grief foundation in Chicago. Someone had shown her the clip, then the documentary, and she had cried for the first time in a year. "Keanu," she said on the phone, voice shaking, "we teach kids who've lost their parents. And one of our students, a little boy named Marco, he watched your documentary. He's 8. And he said, 'That man talks like he knows how I feel. I thought you should know that.'" Keanu didn't respond right away. He had no rehearsed lines, no polite smile to hide behind. He just breathed slowly and let the silence say what words couldn't. "Thank you," he said at last, "for telling me." But what Lena asked next he didn't expect. "Would you ever come talk to the kids? Not for cameras, not for press, just for them?" He thought about it for a long time. He wasn't sure he had the right words. Wasn't sure he'd be strong enough to face so much raw loss, especially in children. But then he remembered River's face. And Kim's, and Jennifer's. "Yes," he said. "If you think it would help, I'd be honored." And so, a few days later, he flew to Chicago. No entourage. No announcement. Just Keanu, a notebook, and a worn leather satchel he always carried when he traveled alone. He arrived at the center. Quietly. The building wasn't large. It looked more like a community library, walls filled with soft colors and drawings made by small hands. He walked into the main room where about 20 kids sat in a circle, waiting. They had been told someone special was coming, but not who. When he entered, some of them blinked in confusion. A few whispered. One boy in the back gasped, "That's John Wick," he said, almost in disbelief. Keanu smiled gently. "Kind of," he said. "But today, I'm just Keanu." He sat down on the carpet, right in the circle with them. No stage, no spotlight. Then, something unexpected happened. Instead of giving a speech, he listened. He listened to Marco talk about his dad who died in a car crash. To a girl named Kelsey who said she dreams of her mom in colors instead of faces. To twins who still set a place at the table for their brother. Keanu didn't correct them, didn't tell them it would be okay. He just sat there, tears quietly touching the corners of his eyes, and said, "I miss people too, and sometimes I still talk to them." The room didn't need more than that. A small girl walked up and handed him a drawing. It was of a man with long black hair sitting on a cloud, with angels holding his hand. Under it, she had written, "For the man who knows how to feel." He took the drawing like it was made of glass and folded it gently into his satchel. When it was over, Lena hugged him at the door. "You changed something in them," she whispered. Keanu looked back at the room. The kids still talking, some laughing now. "No," he said softly. They changed something in me. That night, as he sat in a hotel room overlooking the quiet Chicago skyline, Keanu opened his notebook and wrote just one line. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like silence. Sometimes it sounds like children laughing again. And for the first time in weeks, he felt not just peace, but purpose. The plane back to Los Angeles hummed softly as it moved through layers of clouds, its wings slicing the sky in silence. Keanu sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the light stretched thin across the atmosphere like a promise. Not yet kept. His fingers gently traced the edge of the small drawing tucked in the front pocket of his satchel, the one given to him by the little girl in Chicago. The man with long hair on a cloud. The words beneath still echoed in his heart. For the man who knows how to feel. For most of his life, Keanu had been many things to many people. A movie star, a meme, a mystery. They loved his calm. They loved his distance. They loved the idea that he seemed untouched by the madness of fame. But now something had shifted. Not just in how they saw him, but in how they heard him. In the days following his visit to the grief center, stories began to rise from unlikely places. Not headlines, not gossip, but letters, emails, handwritten notes. Messages sent by people who hadn't dared speak before. Woman from Thailand shared how she carried her husband's shirt in her purse for 5 years after he drowned. A war veteran wrote that he hadn't told a soul about his nightmares until he watched Keanu quietly hug a grieving child. A teenager posted a video explaining how he felt safe to cry for the first time in front of his friends after seeing Keanu walk away from mockery with dignity instead of rage. Keanu read them all, not quickly, not as a duty, but slowly, as if each word came with a heartbeat. He no longer felt alone in his silence. Now he was walking with others in theirs, but not everyone was ready to accept the change. Back in Hollywood, producers whispered that maybe he was leaning too far into sadness. Agents worried that audiences might see him as too soft, too serious. One executive even asked, "Is this the new Keanu, or just a phase?" His answer was simple, "This is just me." They didn't like that answer. Some projects were quietly delayed. Others recast. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. He had always known the industry was fickle. But what stung wasn't the lost roles. It was how quickly truth became a threat when it didn't come packaged in profit. Still, he didn't step back. Instead, he stepped deeper in. He began work on another film, not a blockbuster, but a quiet, intimate story about a man who works in a cemetery, helping families find peace. The budget was small. The script was raw. It had no explosions, no one-liners, just heart. And when the studio rejected it, he funded it himself. Some called him crazy. Others called him brave. He just called it necessary. While filming began, he spent his evenings volunteering at a local hospice, not for press, but for people. He sat beside strangers as they took final breaths, listened to stories told in whispers, held hands that trembled with both fear and love. In those rooms, no one cared about fame. They cared about presence. About someone being there. And that's what Keanu had learned mattered most, not being remembered for what he said on screen, but for how he showed up when no one was watching. One evening, an elderly man named George asked him a question as they sat watching the sun drop behind hospital curtains. "Why do you keep coming back here?" George asked, "Don't you have a bigger life than this?" Keanu thought for a long time before answering. "This is the bigger life," he whispered. "This is the only one that feels real." George smiled and nodded slowly. "Then you're richer than most," he said. That night, Keanu wrote again in his notebook, "The richest moments in life are the ones that can't be sold." Meanwhile, across social media, something continued to grow. The moment he walked out of the View was no longer just a trending clip. It had become a symbol. Artists painted murals of him holding a heart made of glass. Musicians wrote songs using his words as lyrics. Grief circles formed online where strangers from different parts of the world shared memories of lost loved ones, calling them Keanu circles. And perhaps most surprisingly, The View invited him back, not as a guest, but to offer a formal apology live. They had felt the weight of what happened. Joy Behar had issued a longer, more honest statement. It wasn't defensive. It was, for once, reflective. She said, "I failed to see the human. I saw the actor. I forgot that grief doesn't care about fame." The invitation was respectful. But Keanu politely declined. He didn't need the platform. He had already said what mattered with his feet. And that message, it seemed, had reached further than any interview ever could. The final scene of the film was shot in a real cemetery, not a set. Birds rested quietly on old gravestones. The breeze carried the soft smell of fallen leaves. The crew moved slowly, gently, as if afraid to disturb the stillness of the space. And Keanu, dressed in a plain suit, stood under a tree that stretched its arms wide across the sky. He wasn't acting in that moment. Not really. He was simply remembering. He thought of River, of Jennifer, of the daughter he never held. He thought of Kim, still fighting bravely. Of George, who passed away just a week ago, whispering "thank you" with his last breath. When the director called "cut," no one moved for a long time. Some of the crew had tears in their eyes, and Keanu just stood there, quietly, holding his stillness like a prayer. He walked away from that scene without saying a word, the way he had walked away from The View, full of grace. Not performance. The film was finished, and though it had no red carpet premiere, no loud campaigns, something unusual happened when it released on a small streaming service. It began to spread, not because it was advertised, because it was felt. People shared it with captions like, "This made me call my dad," or "I cried and didn't know why, but I needed to." In nursing homes, it played on repeat. In support groups, it opened conversations long locked behind silence. In schools, teachers paused lessons so their students could just sit with their feelings. And Keanu watched from a distance, not claiming credit. He didn't want applause. He just wanted connection. He gave the profits from the film to hospice programs and grief counselors. He refused interviews. He declined award nominations. Instead, he asked people to write letters to someone they missed, even if they never sent them. The movement grew. What had started as a quiet walkout on live TV had become something sacred, a collective shift in how people viewed pain and those who carried it. One afternoon, while walking home from the small bookstore where he now spent most of his quiet mornings, Keanu saw a child sitting on a bench holding a drawing. The child looked up, wide-eyed. "You're the man from the movie," she whispered. He smiled and knelt beside her. "Do you like to draw?" he asked. She nodded. "I draw people I miss." He looked down at the page. It was a woman holding hands with a little girl. There were flowers in the background. And above the drawing, in careful writing, were the words, "My mommy still holds my hand in dreams." Keanu swallowed the lump in his throat and said, "That's beautiful. Your mommy must be very proud." The girl beamed. She said, "I'm brave like you." He smiled gently. "Then I'm lucky to be like you." He walked away from that moment with the drawing folded into his notebook, now filled with scribbled thoughts, poems, and pieces of people he'd met along this quiet road. At home, he lit a single candle on his windowsill, a habit he'd picked up during long nights of filming. It wasn't religious, just a way to honor someone, anyone, who needed light. As he watched the small flame flicker, he thought about how strange the world was. How one quiet act, one moment of walking away, had become a beacon, not because it was loud. But because it was real. He reached for his notebook and wrote the final line on the last page. "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away with your heart still open. He closed the book. Outside, the world kept spinning. But inside, something had changed in him and in the millions who had found themselves in his story. Because the day Keanu walked away wasn't about drama. It was about dignity. And the legacy of that step would last far longer than any headline.